Good morning, everyone. Oh, thank you. That was good. Welcome to the Legends in PR panel. I hope you all had a wonderful evening out last night, and I'm glad to see you are all here this morning and awake. Very good. But with that, I will introduce our moderator for the panel, Dr. Bruce Berger. He's the Reese Pfeiffer Professor of Advertising and Public Relations in the College of Communication and Information Services at the University of Alabama. He is also a board member of the Planck Center for Leadership in Public Relations. He has received a number of teaching awards, including Educator of the Year Award in 2006 from the Public Relations Society of America. Prior to entering academia, Berger was a corporate PR professional and executive for 20 years. He worked on communication projects in more than 30 countries. And with that, I will hand it over to Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on a beautiful morning in San Diego, California. I can't think of a better venue for a meeting like this, so I hope you're enjoying the venue as much as you are the sessions. This is the third year for the Living Legends panel, and I have to tell you, it's always very inspiring for me to stand up here and look out on you, several hundred of the best and brightest public relations students in the world. So we're delighted that you're with us this morning. It's my pleasure, in fact, to serve as moderator for a distinguished panel, highly accomplished and really extraordinary leaders in the field who will address some of the important issues and questions that you have today. And I'm going to briefly introduce them in just a moment. I'd like first, however, to recognize several other people in the audience. Dr. Carla Gower. Carla is a public relations professor at the University of Alabama and director of the Planck Center. Carla, good morning. I'd also like to recognize Janine Garcia, Director of Education for PRSSA, and the incredible lady who gives life to this conference. I'd like to recognize the person who introduced me as well, Rebecca Timms, current president of PRSSA, and a member of the board of the Planck Center as well. It was Betsy Planck's idea several years ago that among our distinguished national panel of public relations professionals and academics, that we should include a student representative. And so we decided to include the current president of PRSSA. Rebecca is the fourth one. We've had three others. I don't know if they're here this morning. Brandy Boatner, Melissa Sharan, and Kevin Sagi. If you're here, stand. All right, well, you're not here, but we applaud and appreciate you anyway. They've done a great job. I also want to say just a word about Betsy Planck. She's unable to join us in San Diego. She had surgery recently, and I spoke with her on Thursday. This is the second conference that she's missed in 40-plus years. So I can tell you that she would love to be here with you. She told me on Thursday again about her two passions in life today, and she reminds me of those frequently. And one is the Public Relations Student Society of America, and the other is all of you, public relations students. She's an unabashed advocate for your cause and your work, and I'd like you to join me in thanking Betsy for everything that she's given us. Let me explain briefly the format for our session. I have a series of questions I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to over the next 30 minutes. These questions were all generated by public relations students and by the PRSSA Executive Committee, so they're questions really that come from you. Then we're going to open the floor for questions that you have today, and I imagine we'll have another 30 minutes or so for that. So please take the opportunity this morning to ask your burning question for the experts that we have here. There'll be time at the conclusion of the panel for you to meet briefly, one-on-one with the panelists if you'd like to do so. The session's also being videotaped, and it will be put up on the Planck Center website for your use in the near future. Now, to our esteemed panelists who collectively represent well more than a century of professional experience and leadership in corporate, agency, education, government, and nonprofit settings. They're all profiled in our book, Legacies of Legends in Public Relations. which is available online as well. So my introductions are going to be brief. Now, I'm going to start by introducing someone who isn't here, Isobel Parke, president of Jackson, Jackson & Wagner, with whom she's been associated for more than 46 years. She's consulted with diverse organizations. She served on the commissions for public relations education in 1999, 2006, and in 2002 she was named recipient of PRSA's David Ferguson Award for Services to Education. Now, Isobel is not here. She's in town. We saw her last evening, and we hope that she shows up sometime during the session this morning. But we're going to proceed. I also want to introduce on my right, Joe Epley, public relations consultant for 40 years, founder and CEO of Epley Associates. He was also a founding member of the WorldCom Group, which is an international network of independent public relations firms through which he helped to introduce public relations into Russia. He served as president of the Public Relations Society of America, chaired the College of Fellows, and has received PRSA's Gold Anvil Award last year, as a matter of fact. John Paluszek, on my far left, is senior counsel at Ketchum. He's deeply involved in international public relations, serves as the liaison to the United Nations for PRSA, and he's president of the Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management. He received PRSA's Gold Anvil Award in 1994, Ferguson Award in 2000, and the Patrick Jackson Award in 2002. Frank Wylie, on my immediate left, Professor Emeritus, Cal State University, Long Beach. Frank has lectured at more than 50 colleges and universities across the country. He's also former public relations director at Chrysler, where he managed many highly successful trade programs, as he did with NASCAR. He, too, is a former president of PRSA and a recipient of the Gold Anvil Award in 1982. I thank you for joining us this morning, gentlemen, and here's the first question, to which I would like each of you to briefly respond. What's the biggest change or trend among public relations professionals that you've witnessed in the course of your career? John, would you like to start us out, please?
Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be with you. And first of all, I want to join with Bruce in saying, Betsy, feel better. We miss you terribly, and we hope to see you soon. I also want to say, just before answering the question, that we are supposedly legends in our own time. We're really legends in our own mind, okay? But finally, as an introduction, just want to say also that we take great inspiration from seeing you in this audience because it manifests a great interest in the profession that we love so well. And we really do indeed welcome you to the study of it and hopefully the practice of it very soon. So very, very quickly, in terms of the question that was asked, it's very difficult to encapsulate the changes that have taken place since we came into the field. But I would say simply the entry to the field has changed tremendously, because when we were entering, it was primarily a matter of having to be a journalist in order to get a public relations position. That has changed, obviously, and your preparation in theory and in practice puts you in a much better position in terms of being productive and fruitful people when you join the field. The second thing that has changed tremendously is that public relations has become a management function in various organizations, appreciated for what it can deliver in terms of achieving organizational objectives. Very, very important. We need to work at that more, but nevertheless, it's happening. And then finally, obviously, your being here is a manifestation of the fact that public relations education has changed and grown tremendously, and that's wonderful. To think in terms of PRSSA chapters being at perhaps as many as 300 schools is just inspiring. So all of those things have changed. Many other things have changed as well, and I'm sure you'll hear some very, very interesting insights from Frank and from Joe.
I think the most important thing is that the immediacy of public relations. The response has to be correct, and it has to be immediate. And, you know, we're dealing with the growth of the fall of media. a lot of the media, in certain ways, have lost their way. They have lost the value that they had. Newspapers keep playing with the news, but you've already had it for 12, 14, 16 hours beforehand. They haven't changed. They haven't shown the imagination that they should have. And, of course, we have to use the same kind of imagination. There's great strength in the strength and stature of PR. There is also, however, a war between PR and marketing, which is going to take place in the future, actually taking place now. And the research that we've done has gained a status. The social media, the present and the future, that is it. You have the greatest opportunity ever. There are a lot of women here today. How many of you know who Maureen Pater is? When PRSA was in its first year, the Senior Society went off to Boston and held a conference during a school mid-exam period. Maureen was then president of PRSSA. I said, what are you going to do about that? She said, I'm going to have a national conference at Dayton. She said, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to give you 3 days. I'll do anything you want. She really made PRSSA first groundwork for all of you.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for letting me be here, and particularly to be in the midst of the greatest minds in public relations in the world today. The only reason I figured they got me here is just to be comic relief. But I think some of the greatest changes we've seen that has such a huge impact is this change in information technology. The three of us are all products of the old manual typewriters. Most of you maybe have never even seen one except in a museum. I remember when we got our first correctable tape in an IBM Selectric, we thought we'd died and gone to heaven. But because of this changes, the speed of communication process has brought the whole world together. That tends to be another great change I think has occurred in our profession, is that we are now living in a shrinking society. This big globe of ours is coming together only into, as ITT used to say, a bright blue marble. And the mobility, not only of here in the United States, but around the world, of people moving and changing, meshing cultures faster together, creating much, much greater changes. And I think in the trend too, I think goes back into information technology, is moving away from print media to to the social media, as Frank alluded to. But I think in that I have a real fear, because I asked people to raise hands, how many people have read a newspaper in the last week? About half of you. And that's better than most classes. Usually when I lecture to a class, maybe 2 hands will come up. And that is a significant change, because we are an information profession that deals with the flow of information and interpretation of that information. And so the changes have happened as we have trends that occur and fads that will occur almost daily in a way, and we have to stay on top of that.
We received several questions about international public relations, and they were directed to John and to Joe. So for these gentlemen, here's the question. What skills and talents are most crucial to success in international public relations? John?
Well, it won't surprise you to hear that the skills and talents that are necessary for domestic public relations obviously still apply. great, strong writing capability and presentation abilities apply. But in the international sphere, as I travel around the world, I find that there are some very interesting things that are happening that are advancing the profession. We think of public relations as having been, as it were, born in the United States, and that we are so far ahead of everybody, but you'd be amazed at what is happening in places like South Africa and New Zealand and in Europe as well. So my first point would simply be that if you want to succeed in international public relations, you really need to know, indeed, how these things are developing around the world. And not just in public relations, but you ought to be a global news junkie. You really ought to know, indeed, how societies and how economic systems are developing around the world. We at Ketchum, for example, have 6 offices in China. Now, if somebody had told me, indeed, a few years ago that we would be represented in China because of its freedom restrictions in terms of media and demonstration and so forth, I would have scoffed. But nevertheless, even that society, that nation, that culture is evolving. And you need to stay on top of how these things are happening all over the world if you're going to be effective in terms of international public relations. It also won't surprise you to learn that a second language is indeed very, very helpful. Now, that may be late in your preparation as you're on the brink, perhaps, of graduation, but nevertheless, in graduate school or in some other way, you can acquire a second language, perhaps Spanish, but a language that indeed is used frequently in many parts of the world. And then, frankly, if it's not too late for you, obviously study abroad or at least travel abroad so that you can indeed increase your understanding of how people think around the world and the things that are happening around the world. All of these things come into success in international public relations.
I think the first thing, too, that you have to learn is that the American standard of way we do things doesn't apply everywhere else in the world. So we have to learn and accept different cultures, be tolerant of the differences that occur in those cultures and the political philosophies that are different than what our beliefs are. I know that the first time I went to Russia, right in the closing days of the USSR, and we have established the first course of study in Western-style public relations at MGIMO, the University of International Relations in Moscow. There was no word in the English language for public relations. And so sometimes, and if you've ever given a talk where it is being interpreted, to an audience that speaks a different language than what your primary language is, you have to remember, sometimes I would go for a paragraph, and the interpreter would speak in about 4 words, and they go on. And then other times I would speak a very simple sentence, and they would go for 2 paragraphs. It is different. It does change, and there are things that we have to realize. This is their culture, and we're just as strange to them as they are to us. But if we don't adapt, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to believe in what they're doing, but you have to be able to embrace these differences so we can bring our differences together into a more cohesive thing. And there's no such thing anymore of any company surviving of any size without being involved in the international arena in some way or the other. So the more, as John said, the more that you can learn about what's going on globally, the better you are in doing your job, even if you're working just for a local firm.
Question really for Frank Wylie. Of the many campaigns you worked on at Chrysler, Frank, which campaign is most memorable to you and why?
One was the situation. A man came to Detroit, called upon us, and got referred to me. And he wanted to tell me how they ran things in Chicago, in his opinion. They were very much against black business of any kind. And we were putting a black dealer in Chicago. He told me how they put a real estate business out of order because the Catholic school mothers had called on the telephone 16 hours a day, and a real estate business can't do business without a telephone. Decided how to handle that. And I decided the best way to do that was quietly. And I went around, I talked to the publisher and editor of most of the publications, the Chicago Defender, the Johnson publication, the newspapers, and so forth. And I gave them all the facts on this, and the threats that the man had indicated that he were concurrent. And asked everybody, please, don't do anything about this. And they all, unless it breaks out. If it breaks out, you've got all the facts and you can go. I guess I did a reasonable job on it because when I called on Mayor Daley, as I walked into his room, he said, well, you're a thorough son of a bitch. And, which is exactly what I wanted. I finally got a call from the man who came to present the facts originally, and he said to me that quite a few nasty phrases, and I said, look, if you want to swear at me, I'm going to hang up. If you want to tell me what your problem is, I'll listen. And he said, the other night I came out of my office, and I was surrounded by 7 big, tall, black men. And they told me, we know where you live, we know where your wife works, where you work, where your daughter goes to school. If anybody throws a rock at the window of that dealership, you better catch it first. I think that was an interesting program. It was complicated, but it all worked out just perfectly.
Thank you. Next question is, what's the most valuable book about public relations to read, or what book was most valuable to you as a public relations professional? Joe?
There was no one book. When I started this business and got into PR full-time, I did have a little bit of background in it. I did it with the Army. And then I came out and became a television journalist for about 10 years. And I started back, decided if I was going to be poor, I'd be poor on my own terms, and started a business. And went down to the Charlotte Library in 1968, and they had 2 books on public relations. One was Cullip and Center's volume, first edition, and the Dardanelle book. Today, there are just hundreds of thousands of books, but I think that any good public relations practitioner is going to be successful has to be well read in a lot of different areas, not just in the trade books. Such as I find to me most helpful is reading current affairs, reading histories, reading biographies of successful people, both in business and in politics, and some of the tradecraft books, and actually good fiction I find helpful. Nothing else, it just relaxes my brain. But most of the books I've seen today, a lot of them are just rehashes of old things and updates. But there are some good ones. There are new grounds being, particularly with this, with some of the great professors we have today that we didn't have 40 years ago. There are good books out there, but just don't concentrate just in one book or one group of books. Broaden your horizons and read all the time.
Thank you. John, would you care to comment on that?
Yes, I'd like to comment very much, as usual. 2 books. Number one, in terms of contemporary public relations and how we got here, Harold Burson's biography called A Pluribus Unum, The Making of Burson Marsteller, is very, very instructive because Harold takes us from the point where he started his career first as a journalist in World War II, please, and then established Burson Marsteller, and as they say, the rest is history. So you'll see step by step how indeed a firm like that evolved, but en route to that, you will see indeed how public relations has evolved. Now, this was published by Burson Marsteller itself, so I don't know how available it is, but nevertheless, I'm sure they'd be willing to share at least some copies. And if anybody after the session is interested in the specifics of it, I'd be happy to show it to you. Now, another book that influenced me very much, and this is at 40,000 feet, okay? Grant me that, okay? There was a book that was published a few years ago called Non-Zero, The Logic of Human Destiny by Robert Wright. Now, that sounds really ethereal. That sounds way up there. But what this brilliant sociologist did in that book was to trace what he called the long arrow of human history in terms of increasing collaboration. Increasing collaboration. Does that sound like something that we ought to be interested in? I hope you agree, okay? And what his point is that as you see civilization develop, yes, over hundreds or even thousands of years, you see a gradual movement toward people understanding that they have to know each other, they have to work together, they have to cooperate in order to get not non-zero, but 1 + 1, obviously, in terms of progress and movement and advancement. I suggest to you that that concept, even with the fact that over the course of civilization we've had ups and downs, but the long arrow has moved in our direction. And as a philosophy of public relations, I really do believe that that is a book that can be very, very interesting to you.
Thank you. I'm going to shift the questioning from 40,000 feet to about 40 feet. According to a recent report by the Association for Education and Journalism and Mass Communication, the job market for graduates in public relations, advertising, and journalism is the worst it's been in the last 25 years. That's as long as they've been doing the survey. How should we students prepare ourselves to face this harsh economic reality? Frank, would you like to comment on that, please?
Well, when they, in the matter of 3 books, the first one I was going to suggest was Microtrends by Mark Penn. Not necessarily for its currency or content, although because it's about 1.5 years old now, but because it shows all of the various areas or indicates all of the various that you should be looking at. You have to read the PR tactics, PR news, etc., because that's sort of a daily report on things that are happening and suggests ways that you may want to look at the future and how you would handle these kinds of problems. But most importantly, I guess I would say you have to read the Wall Street Journal 6 days a week. It's the only paper that covers all of the trends. And it's interesting to note that Wall Street Journal hires very few people from journalism schools. Their major source is Princeton, history, government. But I think those are the kinds of things that you have to really deal with.
Okay, thank you. Joe, how can these students prepare themselves to deal with harsh economic reality of our current economy?
I think the first thing is you have to realize that life isn't a cakewalk. And your parents are not going to be there to pick you up when you stumble. I know that's a hard thing to say for you guys who are in your 20s now and you think you're adults or know you're adults, but there's still so many of you still like to go back to mom and daddy. But they're not going to be there for you. But to be there, I think you have to be very clearly focused as to what you want to do and where you want to work, and be persistent in that search. Don't take a rejection as personal. It's business. And you just have to be persistent at it. Know as much as you can about the company or organization when you call on them, and just keep at it. That first job is quite frankly, is being at the right place at the right time.
John?
Yeah, I think we have to be brutally realistic in terms of the economic climate. Let's not sugarcoat this at all. It is a tough time out there. It's a tough time not only for you breaking in, but it's a tough time for professionals up and down the line in public relations, and as you know, well beyond, with the 10% unemployment rate that we've just achieved. Clearly, it is a tough time. But however, having said that, you really must look past this period, whether it is a year or 2 years, whatever it may be. Now, that may seem like a very long time in terms of your lifespan so far. But believe me, things do pass, things will get better. If you really love this profession, if you have prepared for it, if you continue to prepare for it, don't be discouraged. As Joe has said, be persistent in terms of pursuit of what it is that you want to do. You do have to psych yourself a bit, but understand that you do bring something to our field that clearly we didn't bring, and it's already been alluded to, and that is your sophistication in terms of digital media, okay? And so the people that are coming into our field at the entry level obviously bring a comfort factor, an experience factor with that sort of emerging macro media that is indeed going to, if not dominate, be very, very significant in our field. So don't be modest in terms of your capabilities in that respect. In addition, I would say in the interim, if indeed you don't find something in a reasonable period of time upon graduation, work at further improvement and development of your skills. Whether that means graduate school, I know that's an added expense, but nevertheless, if that's one way to do it, fine. Professional development offerings from PRSA, from other organizations of that kind are certainly something that you want to think about. And finally, I would say practice your skills. Volunteer for nonprofit organizations. Do pro bono work. Keep your skills sharp so that when it comes time, that opportunity comes knocking at the door, you'll be even better prepared. Do not be discouraged. If you love this profession, have confidence, have faith, be persistent.
Thank you. Next question, diversity. Diversity in the profession seems seriously out of balance. A lot of women, a lot fewer men, and very few women or men of any color. What can we do to bring greater diversity to our professional ranks? Frank?
Get male students to learn how to read and write. You know, whoever raised that question, you know, is hanging on to a society that's no longer with us, which is a very nice trend. Society is a contest between men and women. And women are coming on stronger because they have better conversational skills, they have better writing skills, and they have better listening skills. All three of those are essential for communication. 57% of the students in the country are now women. In 1972, women represented 3% of the lawyers. Now it's 32%. It represented 8% of the doctors. Now it's 28%. We're in an era when all social values are challenged. There is just no question that any belief that you have will be challenged. Any belief that your boss has, your company has, whatever. Everything is up for grabs. And that means that you cannot be quiet, beepish kind of person. You've got to be informed and ready. You only have one chance. You don't get 3 strikes, you get 1. Always remember that.
John, would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I think diversity, if we're going to make progress on it, is going to have to start at the campus level. I've always been amazed and wondered positively about the percentage of women who are studying as opposed to men. And I think that that is partially the result of the fact that we have not been able to convince enough men that this is indeed a truly important profession, that it has influence in all kinds of organizations, not just business, but nonprofit organizations, name it, et cetera. and that they can contribute meaningfully and can benefit tremendously from a career in this business. So I think there's work to be done at the campus level in terms of making that much, much clearer. Of course, if we can somehow better marry public relations study with management study on the campuses, that might be helped. I can tell you that in New Zealand at Waikato University that we visited, public relations was taught in the management school, so that you had a goodly percentage of young men as well as women who were getting instruction, getting a great deal of knowledge in terms of the importance, the strategic importance of public relations as it relates to organizational success on a very, very direct basis. So there's much, much work to be done. As the father of 5 daughters, I'm not in any way discouraged by the fact that so many young women are coming into the field. I think that's wonderful. Your opportunities, men, women, people of diverse backgrounds, ethnically and racially, et cetera, are tremendous in this field. I can tell you that the women in our firm, and I'm sure this is true in most, if not all firms, are prospering, are moving up the ranks in management. We have people at the topmost levels in our field who are obviously are women and have succeeded. So it's a delicate problem. It's something that we need to work on, but nevertheless, I think that those are some of the roads that we need to pursue.
Thank you. The next question was really written in slightly different ways by 4 or 5 students, so I'm going to state it this way. Please refute this claim with your best argument. Public relations does not contribute to the bottom line in organizations. Joe?
I think that public relations should be serving as the caretaker of an organization's reputation. We should be serving as the conscience of our employers, advising in areas where reputation is endangered or where opportunities should be capitalized on to enhance the reputation of the organization. Because when an organization loses its reputation, it loses customers, it loses business, it loses respect, and it can't survive very long. I think this more than anything else is the value public relations brings to any organization, whether in a profit or not-for-profit field. And I think that we serve as two functions. We counsel managers, both CEO on down to line managers, on the impact of planned actions that may be planned going on or already ongoing in an organization's reputation now and in the future. We have to maintain the integrity of our companies. And a lot of the things you're seeing today in some of the old line companies, particularly in the financial field, has occurred when I think that a lot of these managers had more concern about making a quick profit than thinking about what long-term impact is going to be. And it is really impacting huge venerable organizations that used to do business on a handshake. Nobody can trust them anymore. So I think that what you need to do is constantly learn how you're focusing and seeing how you can help protect the reputation and even though you are not in the decision-making role, but be able to counsel in a meaningful and constructive way to the decision makers about the decisions they make that impact on the reputation of that organization.
Thank you. Frank, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that the problem is that journalism and business are anti-forces. They have been for some years. PR education is tucked into journalism, which is not a plus for PR. A lot of people are in PR and don't realize when things change. While I was working for a corporation one time, I did a lot of freelance work. As a matter of fact, I've always done freelance work, including speeches and testimony and all of that kind of thing. And 2 articles one time in a paper, and I had a column in a European paper on a regular basis on all under pseudonyms. As a matter of fact, I'd fail the test if I had to identify the names I'd written under. But it's important. You have to read. You've got to write. It doesn't matter so much what you write and what you read. Those are your tools. In basket, read. Out basket, write. And other forms of communication. You're going to have to, because of the electronic communication, you have to write better than anybody's written before because you've got fewer words to work with.
This is our last question before we open it to...
Could I, please?
Please.
Because this is such an important point, okay? 3 quick points, okay? Number 1, never be satisfied with the assertion that public relations does not contribute to the bottom line, okay? For example, those of you who are familiar with the accounting term, the balance sheet, okay? The balance sheet is a list of assets and liabilities, and assets come in 2 basic parts, okay? Hard assets, which means perhaps a company's manufacturing plants, its trucks, et cetera, et cetera. Soft assets. Soft assets on a balance sheet equate largely, perhaps even exclusively, to reputation, brand, et cetera, okay? And there are companies that have higher value in their soft assets than in their hard assets. Because a company like Coca-Cola, for example, okay, has to live on its brand. So this is critically important. How do you achieve a positive brand or reputation? Clearly, through public relations, sophistication, and practice, and so forth. That's point number 1. Point number 2, at this very conference, there is the introduction of a whole new PRSA program called the Business Case for Public Relations. Plunge into it. Look at the case histories. Look at the rationale for that assertion, et cetera, because indeed it is a very great value. Third point, okay, one of the areas that I have stressed in my career at public relations counseling is corporate social responsibility and sustainability. They're interchanged, those terms. They're synonyms, okay? In this day and age, more and more public audiences, be they customers, be they community people, be they government and so forth, are insisting on increased corporate social responsibility. We spoke of marketing as being related to public relations. Cause-related marketing these days, and you know all of the causes that are related to various consumer products and services, from breast cancer to Alzheimer's, et cetera, where retailers, where manufacturers, where various packaged goods companies are saying, we understand that there is a share of market that can be gained and do good at the same time by allying with cause-related marketing. So all of these things fit into the discussion of whether indeed there is a bottom line impact from constructive public relations.
Last question, I'm going to ask each panelist to respond to it briefly. Public relations continues to struggle with its professional image. Please tell us why working in this field is an honorable thing to do. Why public relations, in fact, is an honorable profession. Joe?
I think public relations, the whole definition of public relations to me is 2 words: building understanding. When we comprehend the perspective of others, understanding develops, and with understanding really comes harmony. And that's sort of an altruistic approach to what our profession is, but to me it makes it an honorable thing. Even if we don't agree with each other, we can develop a harmony to the point that we can disagree without being disagreeable. So to me, whether you're selling a product or seeking a political endorsement or raising money for a charity, the first and most simple thing is you build understanding to make that happen. And that comes to effective communications and so forth. But looking back on my career, that's been my guiding philosophy. And everything I do for our clients is that we've got to create understanding between the client and the stakeholders with whom we're trying to communicate. And understanding is a two-way understanding, too. So that would be, that's why I think it's an honorable profession.
Thank you. Frank?
I differ from my friends here. Public relations is not a profession. Mr. Webster and I agree on the definition of profession. And that means it has an educational standard and it is licensed by the state. PR is not. It does not have that educational through the doctorate level. It does not have the state imprimatur. Universities must develop programs which are parallel to law and medicine. 1980, I challenged public relations society to take the leadership in trying to get public relations recognized as a profession. They declined. I would challenge them again to address the priority of licensing for public relations so it is indeed a profession, not something that we just profess.
Frank and I, and perhaps Bruce and Joe are going to have a few beers over that one. But whether or not public relations has currently achieved or is on the way to achieving professional status, I do think that there is a very strong case for making the fact that it is truly an honorable endeavor, indeed, whether we call it a profession or not, et cetera. And as Joe said earlier, I go all the way back to Alan Center and the book Cutlip and Center. Alan spoke to a PRSA conference many years ago, and he said that a profession must have a very significant social benefit. He said medicine has health, law has order, and public relations has harmony, as Joe has said, harmony. Now, harmony as a concept has legs. It is truly scalable. It can be at the level of two consenting adults making a commercial transaction, okay, buying and selling. It can be a matter of harmony in terms of agreeing on policy, et cetera. And when you scale it all the way up, as I'm sure we have all appreciated in recent months, when you scale it all the way up, harmony, dialogue, listening to each other, et cetera, learning from each other, sharing ideas and so forth, sharing philosophies can operate at the international level as well. And so we're seeing that these days more than we have seen it in the past, and hopefully it will bear some fruit. Whether that's bilateral in terms of American public diplomacy, which is, to my mind, a public relations function between nations, or whether it's at the UN level or whatever level, this concept of harmony is indeed scalable, and that's what we do.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions. What I would ask you to do is if you have a question, please raise your hand. When you're acknowledged, we're going to ask you to come up to the microphone here so that everyone can hear the question. State your name, school, and then your question, please. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kyla Aquino from Sacramento State University. And my question is, what is the toughest ethical dilemma you've been faced with, and how did you deal with that?
Who would like to tackle that one? John? Okay.
I think there are a couple of ethical dilemmas that are pretty basic and come up not just occasionally but frequently. One of them is in the counseling field. And as you might expect, the ethical question sometimes is, who will you represent and who will you not represent? Now, in a democratic society, we all know that everybody has the right to legal protection. A strong case can be made that in a democratic society, everybody has the right to communications counsel as well, public relations counsel. However, when you are in a counseling firm, and I've spent my entire career in a counseling firm, you will occasionally be approached by an organization with whom you have great difficulty in terms of sharing philosophy and sharing perhaps interpretation of the public good, et cetera. And so it becomes a very, very difficult question sometimes. You indeed want to expand your business. You want to grow your business. You want to indeed build new capabilities, perhaps, within your counseling field. However, you come across the ethical question of whether indeed you can, in good conscience, apply your counsel and capabilities to a cause that is inimical to, in your judgment, social comity and social progress. The other ethical question that I think is something that has been beneath the surface too long, and I hope we'll address it at some point, is the question of credibility and transparency. When indeed you are presenting the case for whether it's a product introduction or a policy or whatever, whether, for example, the scientific information that you are transmitting is indeed credible and scientifically viable, et cetera. We're not scientists, and we have great difficulty in terms, or even the ability, the time and so forth, to investigate whether scientific data that we may be presenting, or financial data for that matter, is truly audited and accurate. So those are some challenges that will perhaps surface in your careers, and you have to be very careful in terms of how you approach them. Obviously, a mentor in your organization can be helpful because many folks who have been around for some time have faced these dilemmas and have solved them to some degree of satisfaction.
Thank you, John. Frank, did you want to comment on that too?
I think the matter is that you have to be honorable and honest. And I think that's the integral part of what John is saying. Firms handle or select you for different reasons. I remember a client I worked on for some time came to see us one day and said, "You know, I got to let you guys go." He said, "You made a good reputation for me. Now I got to go to New York and get someone to kite the stock." He's right. We would have let him go, but he made the decision first.
Another question, please. Yes.
Hello, my name is Catherine Watson. I'm with the University of Florida. My question is there one tidbit of knowledge that you guys wish you had that you know now when you were going into the career of PR?
Okay, thank you. Good question. Joe?
Would you repeat that? I'm sorry, at old age, my ears or don't pick up on certain tones.
Yes, I was asking what tidbit of knowledge do you have now that you wished you had when you started your career in public relations?
Oh. I'd be a lot richer and a lot wiser. I think that each day in life I learn something new or try to. I had a rule in my company that when you stop learning, I want your resignation. It is a lifelong learning experience. We learn from experience, we learn from reading, we learn from going back to school or whatever. I don't know if I could say, one thing that I would want to do in mixed company or publicly, but there's so many things. I think, if I just from a personal viewpoint, I would have tried to balance my personal life with my family life with my business life, and try to be more in one area than I was. But you do learn every day, and there are times when I wake up, or I'll go back and I'll read something that I wrote 20 years ago, and I said, I can't believe I did that. But it is the sum of experiences, I think, that helps you. You're going to make mistakes, but we learn. The most important thing, I think, of all that I learned is that you learn from your mistakes. If you make a mistake, you never repeat the same mistake twice. When you start doing that, then you're going downhill. But you're going to I'd rather have somebody do something and make a mistake, honestly, if they learn from it, than not do anything at all.
John, comment on that?
Yes, I would certainly agree with everything Joe said. Learning is a lifetime activity. Balancing family life, indeed, with your professional activity Because family life also brings insights that can be very, very useful in terms of practicing public relations. So I think that's very, very valuable. The only other thing I would add is simply that you have to be resilient. And you come out of college and you're positive and you want to move ahead and if you're fortunate to any degree you will, but life has its ups and downs and there are going to be some disappointments, okay? Whether they're personal or professional or whatever, and you have to get through them, okay? And you get through them by understanding that this is what life is like, okay? That it's not all the upward arrow, as I spoke of a few moments ago. There are ups and downs in that arrow. So you have to be persistent, and if indeed, again, you're wedded to this profession, you have to indeed proceed on that basis, that it will be up and down, but it will move forward in some consistent fashion over time. Right?
Thank you.
I think you have to swear off the 40-hour week concept. I never worked a 40-hour week, so I'm not really an expert in the field. But I have worked 7 days a week, time after time. I think you have to be willing to grab hold of a responsibility. If you suggest that something needs to be done, and there isn't somebody else to do it, you step up and do it. I was quite busy taking care of public relations for Chrysler and Dodge. I thought that Dodge needed to get a different kind of image than it had. They kept saying, well, we don't have the money, we don't have the person to run it. I said, I'll run it. And I won the NASCAR championship in 2 years. It can be done. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe that you can make the impossible come to be. But it's only because it's seeming impossible. It's seeming impossible to other people. You can make it happen. That's what PR is really all about. And it's just a hell of a great way to have fun and have an interesting life.
Thank you. Joe had an anecdote come to me.
Yeah, I'd like
share
to
on this.
probably one of the best lessons I learned was in my first job when I was out of the Army and I was working as a young television news reporter in Asheville, where you had to do everything. And I had several very good weeks, fantastic movies, film of, we had film in those days, fires and just everything I did was perfect. And then I had that week when nothing would go right. I missed a story that the newspaper got, and I didn't. I went out and shot a news film that I forgot to put film in the camera. So naturally, I was called on the carpet and chewed out royally, which I took personally and was very defensive. And I told my boss, well, okay, so I made a mistake, but look what I did here, and look what I did last week, and look what I did there. And he said, son, in this business, you're only as good as last night's news show. And I think that served me purpose, because no matter how good you were, you're being measured also by how good you are now.
Seeing your very successful careers, if you could please touch on what pitfalls you find that recent graduates put on their resumes and during interviews, and how we as students can correct those early and ensure that we are making ourselves viable in this economic climate.
I think the biggest pitfall I saw in all the years that I looked at resumes was the exaggeration of capability. I think you need to be just honest with what you do. It will come through in the interview how smart you are without you having to say so. One of the things that I saw, people would give me a portfolio and said, this is what we did, what I did, not we did, what I did. I said, well, this is a student chapter work. Well, what was your role in that? Well, I collaborated on maybe the copy. Not that I wrote the copy, so it comes down, but you've already made a bad impression. So I think you have to be honest with what you are. We don't expect a graduate, most graduates, to have a tremendous resume. You definitely want to put things that you have accomplished and been recognized for that will stand scrutiny. The other thing that I think that in the interviews is coming in is that the one question that will automatically just disqualify a person in my mind is when they come in for an interview for a job in my firm and they say, well, what do you do here? If you haven't got the gumption to find out what we do before you come in to say how you're going to benefit my firm, why should I worry about you? Because it means you won't do the research before you go before a client. Know what kind of job you want, know the organization that you're interviewing, know the people that you're going to interview, be honest. The other thing that I had a turn off on some things, and I think that most young people don't realize that the people that are interviewing you for the most part are your parents. They're people 20 to 30 years older than you. And so they come from that perspective and not necessarily from your perspective. So you have to have an understanding. You still got to be yourself. I don't want people coming in. I've seen some people come so severely dressed, with a corporate look, that was a turnoff. By the same token, when you come in with fads and with the tattoos and body art, that can turn off an employer. Had nothing to do with your talent, but in their mind, they're making a decision. If they got 10 people to choose from, it puts you at the bottom of the list. So know where you want to work, know about the organization before you get in there, and know how you think that you can help benefit that organization.
Thank you. Frank, did you have a brief comment on this too?
Yeah. Here we go, quick, fast. Write the best resume you can. Make it better. Get it reviewed by a professional. Polish it, refine it. Make it the best possible. Never use it. Study the company or the person you're applying a job for, tailor to them. What you've done with a resume is you just collected some information. Tailor the data to the target you want. Describe the variety of your paid internship experience. And paid is a very important word. If they don't pay you, they don't really care what you do. But when it's their money, you have to perform. We insisted that all internships be paid, and that good students had to get 2 or 3 of them. Get a good letter of recommendation, and learn how to interview. I give you one example. I learned when I was in college, I was trying to learn how to interview well. So I interviewed everybody I could. And I was being interviewed for an engineering job. And I was wanting to see how long I could hang in. Well, I hung in long enough to get a job.
Okay, one last question. Thank you for that. One last question, please.
Hi, I'm Evan Roberts from Ohio Northern University. I personally am an advocate of social media, and you guys all touched on how important it is. But to play devil's advocate a little bit, what would be your advice to students who either are overwhelmed or feel overwhelmed about social media, or simply aren't interested?
John?
Well, I think you have to be a news junkie. Whether you get your news from print or from social media, and whether you're into that or not, there is at this point a little bit of discussion within public relations as to just how social media, how important it's going to be, and who is going to own it. Ray Kocher, who's the CEO at our firm, likened it to the Oklahoma land rush, where, in 1910 or whatever year that was, bang, the whistle blew and people ran off and claimed 60 acres, et cetera. Well, advertising people are doing that, public relations people doing it, and other people are doing it as well. I think you have to be very aware of its potential, but I wouldn't put all of my chips on social media at this point.
One last comment?
Well,
Joe?
other than, 2 or 3 years ago, social media really didn't even exist as a major factor. And then a few years before that, there was another, you might call it a fad, but another 2 years, you're going to have something else come out. I found in some of the studies, like on Twitter, is 40 to 60% of the people who get on Twitter get off of it very quickly. I got on Facebook. I now look at Facebook maybe once every 2 weeks, or if somebody sends me a personal message. Facebook tends to go to older people now. Younger people go for Twitter. I think there's something wrong in the world when you're restricted to try to communicate in 140 characters. It certainly doesn't help our language skills, or as Frank was saying earlier, our writing skills. But as John said, it is something we need to know. We need to know how to use it, because you look at who is your audience, who you're trying to convince, who you're communicating to. That determines the best way to do it. And quite frankly, I still go back to the old school. The most effective communications you can do is eyeball to eyeball. The synergism that comes from personal to person communication.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And thank you for that question. On behalf of the Planck Center, I want to thank you again for joining us this morning, for your questions and participation. Our three panelists here this morning really have helped to lay the foundation and create what we see as the present. Okay, it was the future once upon a time. It's the present. Who will be responsible for creating the public relations world 20 or 30 years from now? Well, all of you. Okay, all of you are. You are the future, in fact. I have the pleasure every day of working with undergraduate and graduate students in public relations, and I have the greatest confidence in you that you will make the future not only bright, but shining and, in fact, exceptionally honorable. So please join me in closing by thanking our panelists this morning.